get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on 3. 1, 2, 3, dominate.
Before we kind of get into the matchups and all the stuff we want to talk about, right after the 49ers defeated the Dallas Cowboys at Levi Stadium last week, kind of what was going through your head as you realized it's going to be 49ers Eagles in the championship round at Lincoln Field?
Yeah, so I didn't have a lot of thoughts at the time other than Philadelphia is obviously a very talented team. We saw what they did last weekend as well. They demolished the Giants. And, going to Philadelphia is always a difficulty. Going cross country to the East Coast, having to play there is difficulty. But I actually was able to spend some time watching Philadelphia over the course of the week, which is not something I did a lot of this season. I just wasn't really interested in watching them on TV. And then I didn't have any interest to watch them back over the course of the week. So I was finally able to do that over the week. And my first thoughts after watching them was, wow, this is going to be a really, really tough game. I see this a lot on both sides where both these teams, I see fans on Twitter, and it is Twitter, so maybe it's unserious, but I see a lot of trying to diminish what either of these teams are. And I don't really like that because my first thoughts when I watch this is the two best teams in terms of talent outside of the quarterback in the NFL. Like these two teams, when you look at the matchups on the line of scrimmage on the outside, the linebackers, the safeties, everybody involved in this game, the talent, it's a true heavyweight matchup. And going back to just liking football, yeah, I want the 49ers to win as a fan, but this is going to be an awesome game to watch just as a fan of football in general.
I think I agree. And I really like the point you brought up about, we've seen people try and diminish on both sides the really what the other team has done. And I don't think that that's fair to either team. When you talk about it, a lot of people try and bring up past games or record or where the 49ers lost this year to diminish them. Same with the Eagles losing to the Commanders earlier this season. And at this point, what I said yesterday is I don't think any of that matters. You're in the NFC Championship for a reason. And like you said, roster-wise, there's no denying that these are the two strongest rosters in the NFC, maybe in all of football as well, when you talk about the entirety of the roster. And I think that that's why it's important to note how tough this is going to be for both teams. This is a challenge. I mean, we say it every round as the playoffs continue, but this is a challenge that neither team has seen before. And that's why I don't know if the data that we've seen or the games that each team has lost really plays a role at all. I think it's got to be just focused on what's happening right now. How is the team now? Because the teams change every as they are. They can get better, they can get worse, but what matters is how the team is playing now. And I think on both sides, both teams are playing pretty darn good football. We saw the Eagles demolish the Giants, like you said, and now the 49ers, while they had a tough matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, ended up coming through as the victors.
Yeah, and it's funny because you bring up that point of, like it's how you are playing right now. It doesn't matter how you're playing before. And I 100% agree with that because when you look at where the 49ers were when they lost to Chicago or lost to Denver, it's a completely different football team from them. Like there's players on this team that are completely different football players than they were then. Same thing with Philadelphia. They started the season much faster than the 49ers, but same thing compared to, when they lost to Washington. They're a completely different football team, where they lost to New Orleans with Gardner Minshew starting. And that's where when you make the point that neither of these teams have seen a team like this, I think that needs to be reiterated because there's only two teams like this in the NFC. The way I see it is these two teams are so talented. If you go back the last 10 winners of the NFC, you could argue that either of these two teams could have beat those teams. Like that's how good I think both of these two teams are. And I think the NFC this year is so bad that these two teams have kind of been steamrolling the rest of the conference because of that. And we're going to finally see some equal competition. Dallas could compete on, a good day with Philadelphia and the 49ers. And they kind of did, though I thought that game was made closer by the 49ers approach. I thought their approach was a little bit more conservative because they felt like the only way they could, have Dallas beat them is if they gave the game away. And so they kind of played it conservative because they felt like if they didn't give the game away, Dallas wasn't capable of coming in there and beating them. And they were absolutely right. Dallas wasn't. And so when you look at that, I just see it as, again, this is going to be the ultimate heavyweight matchup. Like, this is as good as it gets. Two good offensive lines, one really good, one good as well. Two really great defensive lines, two good secondaries, two good linebacking cores. I would say, one that could be taken advantage of a little bit, maybe at times in Philadelphia. Though it's a good linebacking core. Two really well coached teams. It's going to be a really special matchup.
I agree. I definitely agree. And to transition a little bit before we get to this matchup, Philadelphia, you talked about it, demolished the New York Giants really in every aspect of the game, won 38-7 last week and rushed for nearly 250 yards. Is there anything you personally think you can take away from that game that the 49ers should either be even more worried about or not because of the difficulty of that matchup in comparison to the matchup that's coming in this week?
Can you repeat that? Sorry about that.
Nah, you're good. Do you think that there's anything to take away from the pass game that Philly had because of how
Right.
dominant it was? Or do you think that because
No,
of the
not.
difficulty?
Yeah, sorry about that. I had a momentary just blank in what you just told me. So yeah, I don't think we can really take a lot from that. The Giants just weren't a very talented football team. They were a great story. Brian Daboll's a great coach. Wink Martindale's a great defensive coordinator, and they made a lot of, as the old saying goes, they made chicken salad out of chicken, you know what. And that's kind of how it was. They just weren't a very talented team. So I felt like I thought they would play it closer in the first half, and ultimately Philadelphia would run away the same way the Niners ran away from the Seahawks, where the talent would just overwhelm them. But Philadelphia's talent overwhelmed them from the moment the ball was snapped in the kick, or the initial kickoff, where the ball was initially kicked off and the first whistle was blown. They had really no chance in that game, and I don't really look at it and say, oh, that's going to be, something that you can look at and say that's what's going to happen in the Niners games, because the talent of these two teams can't even be compared. The Niners are so much more talented at every position than the Giants. Like, what are we talking about? And I hate that recency bias too, right? Because
Right.
I've seen it also earlier in the playoffs, where a lot of people looked at the Cincinnati Ravens game, and right after that, they were like, "Oh, maybe Cincinnati isn't as good." It's about matchups. Baltimore matched up very well with Cincinnati. They would have beaten them with a healthy Lamar Jackson because that was just a good matchup for them. And then, Cincinnati was still really good. That's why they steamrolled Buffalo. And so I hate this just initial, what you talked about it, like in the moment, initial
Exactly.
reaction, right? Because if you switch the Niners to playoff games, a lot of people are coming into this and thinking, dang, the Niners are going to steamroll them because look what they did to Seattle in the second half. So I hate that kind of reaction to what just happened. We have a body of work with these two teams. I think it's going to be a really tight, close football game, and it's going to come down to everything that football games always come down to: big plays and turnovers.
I agree. I do agree, especially with the turnover battle. I know you've seen it. We've all seen it. The turnover battle, the Niners have been the best team in football this year. That's why they have the best turnover differential. And they've also won the turnover battle I think it's 12 games. I think they've gotten tied in maybe 3 or 4 games and then lost it in the
They're
4 losses.
they're
Go for it.
15-0 when they
There
have
you go.
tied or won the turnover battle, and then they are
Exactly.
0-4 when they have not won the turnover battle. So pretty simple formula.
You either turn the ball over more than your opponent and you lose, or you win. That's exactly how the Niners have played
Right.
this year. And recently, they've been creating more turnovers really during this 8 game winning streak. Or well, now it's more than 8 games. It's close to what is it now? 12 game winning streak.
Yeah,
They
12.
continue to get those turnovers during that stretch.